We are here today to talk to you a little bit more about Grimcoven.
Yep.
We have some other content up on the channel. We did an unboxing. We have a round one coming, or it may be out already
depending on when you're
taking
watching
a look
this.
at this, where we play through some of the game. But in this preview, we wanted to talk about more what the game is doing in a general sense, what it does differently than some other games that we've played, and really kind of the high points of, I think, what the game is offering.
Yeah, so let's talk about what the game is and what it's about. So this is kind of a grimdark fantasy game. This is, almost like with a science fiction bent to it.
A little bit.
But it's definitely like dark fantasy. Think like Bloodborne, Elden Ring, games like that. You are these bounty hunters who are entering into this dark world to fight monsters and track down your bounty. And your bounty being a giant boss that you're going to pre-select that's going to influence some of the decisions that you make when you're setting up the game. Now, your characters themselves are kind of steampunked out with like cool weapons and gear, and like I have the Technomancer in front of me who uses electricity and shoots electricity out. So they really lean into that fantasy element, I think, of the world.
Yeah, for sure. I think yours more than any. Yours is the steampunkiest of the characters.
Well, there's another character we don't have on
duality.
The duality. And again, we were sent a sample kit that was a demo that featured 3 characters and 2 bosses. There's going to be more content than that in the final.
I would think so.
Because we know one of the key things here in this game is modularity.
Yeah.
You're mashing up a bunch of different stuff, not just the characters you're choosing, not just the boss, but actually the scenario and everything that goes into that scenario.
Yeah,
so
let's talk about what's on the table, because there's quite a few things. We have those character boards, and even those are physically modular because you put in your character inside there. Then you have this scenario map. It's comprised of a bunch of different tiles. It's gonna be different based on the scenario. We've seen 2 different scenarios ourselves. But even when you set this up, it's also going to be sort of like variably set up because there's this deck of cards that you go through that affect effectively the terrain that you put out there. You pull a card, the one we did, you pull 4 cards. The first one, you place where it's supposed to go. Each card has a very specific slot that it goes to that affects this sort of scenario. In this one, for instance, we had this rushing river that made it so that this river had some effect. It's gonna wipe sort of like enemies down and us if we're standing at the river at the end of any of our turns. However, had we not pulled the river card, that would not have been an effect in this scenario.
Right, and you'll notice that these environment cards, they're either going to be tokens or they're going to be environmental cards that affect specific tiles. Like, for example, one of the first cards I pulled was the carriage, and it told me to put the carriage token over here. We discovered that interacting with the carriage starts a whole new side quest and actually could start one of many different things when you go to it. And the fact that this carriage is even here was just random. And we had the Twisted Lands, the Rushing River, and the Pile of Skulls. So those were our 4 environmental cards. You could watch a different preview of this game or play it yourself. There was a whole stack. You could have 4 completely different cards that move around in different places. Some of the things like these treasure tokens, where the enemies start, the boss, this tornado, and these lament tokens are all dictated by the scenario itself, so that won't change. But the fact that you're playing with a completely different setup besides that can really influence how you play the game.
Yeah, it certainly kicks things off in a potentially different direction. One thing that is going to be fairly similar are you're going to have an elite card, but again, it could be one of a few different elites. A minion card, again, could be a different minion. And then you've got the boss board over here, which is where you're going to put the boss that you've selected or through, the narrative that you're choosing. And then you're going to set that up with all of that boss's stuff. In our demo session, we had a set number of cards that we set for its attack cards, which are across the bottom. And then there's even a stage card because like any good sort of video game boss, the boss changes and does different things as the game goes on.
Yeah, and this boss attack deck, it's made up specifically of attack cards for this boss. This is the Convergence. So we took the cards that we were told to take for the scenario, but again, at the very bottom of this is a final action card. When you actually defeat the enemy, we fight the boss, you're actually like removing cards from the game. So all of these actions are tied into specific body parts. They do specific things. And you can kind of get a preview here, like we've seen in some other games though, where you can see what's coming up next turn and this turn. So you have a chance to mitigate that or prepare for that, but you can also deal damage directly to these cards in hopes of defeating them. That's one way that you're going to progress to the game. Eventually, you've defeated enough of those cards that the boss activates his final action, and you go into the final showdown. But even this final showdown card, there are multiples for each boss.
Yeah.
So you do it randomly, you put it face down, you don't know what your final showdown is going to look like until you actually get there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting mechanism. There have been similar ones in other games that have bosses, but this one's really interesting. And first of all, you don't have much time to take out those pieces. Those cards that move down are effectively different body parts. If they go off the end and you didn't defeat it, oh well, they may ultimately get shuffled back into the deck.
If you do 5 out of the 6 health, oh well, when that card activates, it goes to the discard pile and will get shuffled back in. The health does not carry over in any way.
So how are we doing all of this stuff? Well, that's through dice placement. Like I said, we have a playthrough. If it's not up yet, it will be soon. You'll see the game in action, but just to give you an idea right now, this is a dice placement or dice allocation type game. This is not where we're going to, there's a ton of dice here, but you're not going to be really rolling them in each attack to see what happens. It's not a dice chucker. But at the beginning of every hunter phase, during the refresh phase, you're going to roll the dice, and those are the icons that you have to use on your turn. So as you build your dice pool, which is going to be something you do throughout the game, as you build the sort of items that you have that give you the abilities that you can use, you're going to want to take that into consideration so that you are choosing items that use the dice faces that you're collecting the most dice for.
You're right.
And then you're going to be assigning those on your turn. And like some other Awaken Realms games, like Nemesis for instance, on your turn, you're going to be taking 2 actions, using those dice, maybe some actions that are out on the board, things like that, to get things done. You can move by allocating a dice here. Movement is dictated by the movement of your character. You can sprint, which adds a little bit to that. There is line of sight with some attacks. It looks like there may not be line of sight for other attacks. There's a lot that you can do, but you're doing it little by little, and it's a game of cooperation as well.
Definitely a game of cooperation. In fact, one of the actions you can take is to assist players by giving them an assist token and letting them spend one of your dice instead. And that's important because a lot of these dice do have to match. At the start of the game, only 2 of your basic actions have a particular die. You'll see that move and tactic are blank. They can be anything, but you're going to expand your tableau with cards. And that's kind of a key thing in the game too, because as you're fighting these enemies, you're gaining a corruption in the form of this lament.
Yes.
This is something that you're absorbing into you, kind of like collecting souls, and it goes on your player board. And you can turn this lament into corruption every round to power yourself up. Eventually, as you power yourself up more, you're going to get access to some of your advanced cards, which are going to give you more places to place your dice. They're going to give you more combos, or they can just let you add more dice to your dice pool. However, as you move up this corruption track, you're drawing a corruption card every round. The effect gets worse and worse based on how high you are. So it might be tempting to rush to the top and unlock all your abilities, but you might not be in a good position to deal with all of the terrible corruption that is happening because of that.
Yeah, for example, I just pulled 2 of the corruption cards. If you're anywhere below 7, nothing happens. But once you get to 7 to 12, 13 to 15 or higher, it's a lot of bad things that happen. So it's not just the enemy phase that you need to be worried about, but it's this as well.
And the other cool thing about managing your corruption is when you get to the halfway marker, when you get to 10 corruption, you actually get to flip over your character and you become a corrupted version of yourself. And this is on that theme of, trying to use this negative energy to fight back against those monsters. The corrupted version of your character is just better. You get more health, you get a better effect. Something usually happens when you flip it that improves your character as well. There's really no downside except you're already at least at 10, which means you are going to trigger something bad on every card.
Yes.
You can kind of stay in like the 1 to 5 range and be safe from most of the cards, but you really do. You need to progress up this track. You need to unlock your evolutions if you want to have a chance of ever actually fighting or defeating the boss.
Yeah, that decision space feels a little bit similar, not exactly like that of Death May Die, where you're like running your madness up there because you want to do that to level up, but at the same time, it can be a little bit dangerous. Now, in this game, if you get to the end, you don't lose, you don't die. But like Ryan said, those corruption cards is really what's going to get you when you push that.
Those corruption cards will probably kill you. And again, we said that this is a boss battler, and I talked about getting ready to fight the boss, but this is not a game where you explore tiles and eventually you find the boss or something triggers and the boss shows up. The boss is there from the start, and the boss activates starting even from the first turn, round 1. So this game throws you right into the action, and it does it in I think a really cool way that I did want to talk about a little bit, because there's a lot of steps to this game. And you've got this like player aid. that kind of talks you through how to take your turns. But then when you go to the enemy phase, there's multiple things that happen, and they give you these cool little like step tokens to put out next to the thing that happens. So you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you've hit all the steps of the enemy phase.
Yeah, and that may seem like a silly little thing, but I gotta tell you, that extra little visual element on the table really helps you not miss something. We play so many board games.
Yeah.
We just played one the other day where we constantly missed the same step over and over. And when you have this combined plus with that player aid, you're able to go, okay, step 1, boom, boom, boom. And everyone at the table can go, wait a minute, did we not do step 2? And
Right,
because step 2's facing us right here. So it really helps train you to get into the rhythm. Honestly, even if like after a couple games you didn't have them out there, although I would recommend
I would always recommend it. It's just so nice to have
it really
them.
helps you get into the rhythm of like step 1, going through all those steps.
It helps you remember the order too. It's always your event card first, then your minions act, then your elite acts, then your boss does their attack card, and then the timer moves, and the timer is going to trigger off something terrible every round. Doing something specific for the boss. For example, the Convergence has these tornadoes that are going to be moving around the board. They're going to be summoning minions, but eventually they're going to reach a new stage, like David referenced earlier. This is where things get bad because, for example, this one is Twin Tornadoes. It adds a second tornado to the map. There's another stage that makes all the tornadoes that he summons stronger. And then there's one that just makes him, turns him on fire. So you have to mitigate these stages, and a lot of them, once they come out, they're out for the rest of the game. And you have to deal with those effects forever. So the same thing with the event cards too. As he adds event cards, a lot of them just stay out. And so the longer you take to get to the boss and kill him, the more prepared you are, but the more you have to deal with. So again, you're not just balancing your corruption, you're also balancing whether you want to just rush to the boss and start trying to take out his cards, or try to really build yourself up before your first encounter. Meanwhile, trying to like run around the board and escape from him as he follows you around doing damage.
Yeah, and it probably will really depend on the boss himself, because this boss, the Convergence, this guy wanted you far away for certain powers, because the further you away, the worse it was. Now, conversely, he had a couple powers where if you had some distance between you...
Well, it was the reverse. He would suck them in. Well, he had
one.
That's
right.
He was 7 damage, but you would lose, it would fall off one space, but he sucks you in.
Yeah.
And I was on his space, and I was like, I'm about to take 7 damage if we don't defeat the card and get it away from him. So there's this element, like David said, of cooperation, of not just looking at your own board and saying, what can I do? But looking at this and saying, okay, if Cyclonic Spear goes off, you're going to die. So maybe we should do whatever we can to defeat Cyclonic Spear. There's always a basic response card, so he's always going to do something. Again,
but it's far less than...
I should mention, there's multiples of these too.
100%.
So it's another point of variability. But even if you defeat the card, he's going to do something, but it's less. And so you can all work together and say, everyone stop what you're doing, focus on the boss right now because the Techomancer is about to die. And that's even more so than just passing dice back and forth to make sure that people are able to do their best actions. You can really cooperate in like, okay, we need to deal with minions. They're getting a little too overwhelming. Or like, the boss is in a vulnerable spot where we can all get him. Let's maybe focus on the boss this turn.
It is definitely cooperative. It has a lot of those elements, particularly with the assist tokens and sharing the die. This game is, at least based on our experience, pretty tough as nails. I'm sure there's still some balancing they have left to do. The big takeaway, though, that we want to communicate, if we haven't communicated already, is the variability here. This game, from beginning to end, like we said, it's probably lighter on the narrative. There's no campaign. It's lighter on the narrative side, although there is some narrative.
There's some narrative,
sure.
And you get some. There's a deck of secret cards that you might unveil for doing things. And for example,
opening up quests during the. It feels narrative.
We had like a narrative tile that we could go interact with. So there's some things.
But this is not going to be the kind of thing where there's a big story session and then the boss fight. This throws you into a boss fight, and that boss fight that it throws you into is going to feel pretty different than the last one, even if you're trying to take on the same boss again. Because it's incredibly variable with all these cards. I'm kind of interested we haven't looked through all the rest of the cards.
There's a ton of environment cards,
but those cards that set up the environment differently can be very interesting and have significant effects on the gameplay.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But that is Grimcoven. Like we said, if you have any questions at all, check out the rest of our content. We have a few things up on the channel. But if you do have any more questions, make them in the comments below. We'll get down there, answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.